Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 1, Day 6. But first, let's do our daily punishment. Did you hear about the restaurant on the moon? I heard the food was good, but the restaurant had no atmosphere. Your key terms for today are Bacon's Rebellion, the Headright System, the Puritan work ethic, Leisler's Rebellion, Town Hall Democracy, Old Deluder's Law, the Halfway Covenant, Jeremiah's Sermons, and the Salem witch trials. We're going to talk about New England and Southern economical and political developments and religious up until 1700. We'll go over New England's Southern religious and social changes up until 1700. So let's talk about backcountry problems by poor yeoman farmers. So there are going to be some poor freemen. Many of them will be former indentured servants, especially in the colonial South. A lot of them will be roaming the country. They could not afford to buy land. At this time, a lot of the people settling in the colonial South were men, so there was not that many women. So a lot of these poor freemen had no women to marry, and they kind of were very unhappy. There were indentured servants coming to the new land. A lot of these ones were working in plantations. They would give 50 acres of land to any rich person that would provide passage for an indentured servant. This would not help the indentured servants, and often after their time of service, they would be completely broke with no prospects. Nathaniel Bacon was a planner. He was part of the aristocracy, but he is going to lead a rebellion led by 1,000 untamed backcountrymen in 1676. He will burn Jamestown to the ground, and then he will kill some friendly Native Americans that were allied with Jamestown. He was going after William Berkeley, the governor of Jamestown. He had a personal beef with him. Bacon will eventually be killed, and 20 of the other major leaders will be hanged. But Bacon's rebellion is going to scare a lot of the Southern aristocracy. They're going to think that there might be a social class rebellion led by the poor whites. They're going to think that the indentured servants, the poor white people, are not a great source of labor. So even after this is what's going to really get a lot of white landowners to switch to African slavery. It's going to create fear amongst the money unlanded farmers, the poor freemen, and they're going to want to find a new labor system, so they will switch to African slavery. There's Nathaniel Bacon, funny looking man. So in 1619, slaves did arrive in Jamestown. By the 1680s, with rising wages, fewer immigrants, and problems with the freemen, like Bacon's Rebellion, they will start to switch to African slaves. Slaves will start to outnumber white servants by the 1680s. England will rush in and put in money for the slave trade. At first, some slaves could gain their freedom. It was not an immediate racially based system immediately. Some slaves actually became slave owners, although super rarely. But by the 1680s, in England and in the colonial South, they started to create slave codes. They considered slaves property, not human beings. The children were property too. It did begin as an economic system, but it will definitely become a racial discrimination system. And we really have seen that by the 1680s. Let's talk about some of the ideas of Africans in America. African slaves will bring with them their culture and their characteristic. They'll bring musical instruments like the banjo, the bongo. There will be some slave rebellions. You have a slave revolt in New York City in 1712. This will fail and African Americans will be hanged. There'll be the Stono Revolt in the 1730s in South Carolina, which will also be squashed. Slaves will be considered a more manageable workforce than white indentured servants. There will be no slave rebellions that match the intensity of Bacon's Rebellion, at least not yet. Slavery will increase the gaps in the social structure in the South. You'll have at first the planter aristocracy, the rich plantation owners that have many slaves. Then you have the small farmers who might have one or two slaves or no slaves. then you have the landless whites, then you have the indentured servants, which start to die out, and then at the very, very bottom, you have the slaves. So now the indentured servants have somebody to look down upon, which actually does make them happier. People are pretty horrible. And this shows the Southern social structure. For women during this time, life will actually increase by 10 years by coming to the New World, despite the harshness of it. There will be early marriage. In the South, there was very little women at first, so women could actually inherit property, and women actually had more rights in the South than in New England. Men died early. There was very few women, so they actually inherited property because of that. In New England, they did not want to undercut the family. New England's very religious, very Puritan, very sexist, so women could not inherit property. There were some rights for widows, especially in the South. Women could definitely not vote. Husband's power was not absolute. There was laws against abuse. Women could be midwives in New England and the South, particularly New England. Midwives were the ones that helped give birth. Divorce was very rare. For the most part, the man would be the one that would have to begin the divorce. Here's a picture of the female life during this time. Let's talk about my friends in New England. Woo! So Increase Mather is going to be a Puritan preacher. He will oppose the Dominion of New England. He'll also be a big-time witch hunter. We're about to get in the witch craze in New England, where they just think everybody's a freaking witch. One of his great quotes is, "It's better that 10 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person should be condemned." Oh, that's actually kind of nice. That's not as bad as I thought. Another quote that really shows the New England work ethic is, "An hour's idleness is as bad as an hour's drunkenness." The New Englanders were very diligent. They believed in working really hard. Everything, according to their whole Puritan beliefs, everything they did was based on a calling for God. So they shouldn't get drunk. They shouldn't be lazy. They should be working really hard. This is called the Puritan work ethic. It was created by Weber, who's a sociologist. He came up with that idea. He said that like the Puritan seriousness and the Puritan work ethic is what helps lead to capitalism in America. Woo! Another quote that kind of shows their disdain of being lazy is, "Idle hands are the devil's workshop." There will be some other rebellions during this time. Another poor yeoman rebellion aimed at the patroonships was Leisler's Rebellion in New York. This will also be crushed. Let's talk about some of the New England towns. Towns with 50 or more peoples had to provide elementary school. This was based on a law that was passed called the Old Deluders Law. The Old Deluder is Satan. He's the first liar. And according to Puritan rational thought, they thought that since Satan is a liar, education would be an enemy of Satan. And if you were educated, you would automatically support Puritans because they are the most rational faith ever. The reason the Old Deluders Law is pretty legit is the beginning of public education in America. This is only for Massachusetts, but it is like one of those stepping stones towards education. A lot of the New England settlements will be very compact, homogeneous, patriarchal. But New England will form some colleges pretty early on. They'll form Harvard. Then some people think that Harvard is too liberal. So they'll form Yale because they think Harvard's too liberal. Then they'll think Yale's too liberal, so they'll form Princeton. Oh, freaking Puritans. The only really university in the South will be William and Mary. A lot of the Southern plantation owners will have private tutors. Education will not be as big of a deal in the colonial South. One of the big deals you see in the colonial America in New England is congregational churches. Congregational churches were based on, the theology of Calvin. But in congregational churches, the parishioners get a vote for who's their pastor. Because of this, like Thomas Jefferson and other people said that the congregational churches were one of the stepping stones towards American democracy. Also in New England, in these towns, they had local democracy in their little towns, their little clustered settlements. And they would have like a town hall that all the people would gather in and they could debate and discuss stuff. So there was local democracy in New England towns if you're a white man. So you do see with like the congregational churches and the town halls, the birth of democracy in New England. This is one of the Puritan books, Adam and Eve, their God did grieve. Aww. Okay. Let's talk more about some New England religion. Puritan zeal did start to dampen in the late 1600s. People were less likely to attend church, not quite as Puritan and as crazy as before. Because of this, some of the preachers will start doing Jeremiah sermons where they start talking about the end of the world is nigh, repent or you will go to hell. They're called Jeremiah sermons because in the Bible, Jeremiah made a lot of those doom and gloom speeches. What's going to happen is even after the Jeremiah sermons, it's still not going to quite work out. So the Puritans will kind of come to a compromise. They'll do something called the halfway covenant. They will admit to baptism, but not communion, children of baptized but unconverted parents. So in Calvinism, in congregational churches, you are baptized, but you had to go through a conversion experience where you talked about your conversion experience. Nowadays, we call that being born again to become a full member of the church. The halfway covenant tried to increase membership by kind of finding a middle way. They allowed you to join the church if you were, if your parents were baptized, even if they were not converted. This will help weaken the distinction between the elect and others. So even though it does increase church membership, it does kind of dampen the zeal of the Puritans, makes them a little bit less hardcore. Let's lastly talk about the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials began in 1692. Eventually, 20 people will be put to death for being witches, and 2 dogs will be executed for being witches. Witch trials were common in New England and Europe. Often, witches were property-owning women, and they would accuse a woman of being a witch so they could take their property. A lot of these disputes were unsettled social and religious conflicts. Cotton Mather is going to participate in the Salem witch trials. He will be a big supporter of it at first. He claimed to be an expert on witches. The Salem witch trials was really a bunch of, at first, girls. It started off with one girl, and she started accusing some other people of being witches. It kind of spread like wildfire. What we think actually it was like a dispute over some of the rich families in Salem wanting each other's land. Eventually, some people will be executed. One person will have a boulder put on his chest until he's squashed to death because he refuses to say that he's not a witch. But it was not a real thing, obviously. Witches are not real. Let's talk about New England life. Slavery will not be profitable on small New England farms. One of the things you do see in New England is New Englanders are diligent. They work hard, but they're afraid of working. They're afraid of working so hard they become wealthy because they do see that wealth could make you turn away from God because you focus on wealth instead of God. This is called the whole God versus cod debate. Cod is a fish that New Englanders grew. In New England, farmers were not wealthy yet. Wealthy people did not leave the place that made them wealthy. Women will cook, wove, clean, and care for the children. Men will farm, fence, cut firewood, and they will tend the livestock. That's New England life, and there's a recreation of a New England household. Looks cute. All right, kiddos, that is all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces, deuces, deuces.